Welcome to So That Reminds Me, Reminder Publishing's bi-weekly podcast discussing Western Mass news. I'm Chris Mauza.
And I'm Tyler Garnett.
And we'll be your host for today's episode, which is brought to you by the Northampton Family 4th celebration coming up on June 22nd. We'll have more details on that later in the show. So how you doing today, Tyler? It's been a while.
I know. I was just about to say it's been a while since the lovely listeners have heard our voices.
Yeah.
We had a couple episodes drop recently with our other hosts, Dennis and Peyton, as well as their lovely special documentary episode, which everyone should listen to if they haven't yet. I enjoyed it. So I'm excited to get back to it this week.
Well, and what I'm excited for is the weather is finally starting to turn. It's getting nicer. We haven't had much of the dreary. We had so much rain for so long that seeing the sun for an extended period of time has been nice and a little odd.
Yeah, I would say, it's definitely that time of year where, you have any excuse to get outside and maybe do some work and enjoy the rays on your face is going to be a good day.
Well, and on top of everything else, you should enjoy the nice weather and come out to the Northampton Family 4th celebration.
Exactly.
And, with that, we will take a look at the 5 stories that we'll be discussing this week. While not a story, we are going to address the anniversary of the June 1st tornado, the selection of the next Springfield superintendent of schools, the chaos in the Chicopee schools, budget dispute between Northampton's mayor and its schools, and the old-time baseball festival taking place in Suffield. And we'll get to those right after these short messages.
Bring It Home magazine takes the best in the home renovation or home building business to your door. Featuring countless local businesses, Bring It Home helps Western Massachusetts and Connecticut homeowners, both new and seasoned, find the best of the best to suit their home's needs. The magazine is host to articles on local businesses explaining the latest trends, from outdoor necessities to indoor design. For advertising information or to view Bring It Home online, go to thereminder.com. Come on out for the Northampton Family 4th fireworks on June 22nd at Look Memorial Park in Florence. Festivities begin at 5 p.m. with music by Moose and the High Tops, and the Florence Community Banks will help us kick off the fireworks at dusk with patriotic music. Boomer from the Thunderbirds will be stopping by to say hi. There will be a variety of local food trucks and vendors, as well as games for the kids. We hope you can join us for all the fun. The rain date is June 23rd. For more information, visit the event's Facebook page, Northampton Family 4th Committee, or its website, northamptonfamily4th.com, for more information and updates.
And we're back. So to kick off this episode, I thought that we'd talk about the recent anniversary of the tornado that was on June 1st, 2011. I recall this very vividly because I was part of the team at the time that covered this whole really insane event. For the reminder, I think that of the crew, editorial crew that is still here, I think myself and Debbie Gardner, the editor of Prime, are the ones left who were around for that. Mike Dobbs still does some work for us, but he's now retired. But I thought that it was important for us to mark this. It was really I did jot some notes down about this, but I'm really kind of going more off the cuff, so forgive me if I'm repetitive or anything. But this was truly, from a personal and professional standpoint, truly something that I never thought that I'd be a part of. Just the sheer imagery. I wish that at the time we had the access to better photography equipment to capture things that words just alone won't capture. I mean, I still have vivid memories of seeing trees on houses that had been lifted off of their foundations and moved, just downtown Springfield, the South End, literally in ruins, and really awe-inspiring from the standpoint of how powerful nature is. And then at the same time, how resilient communities can be.
Yeah, no, I mean, you kind of mentioned it a little bit, and like you guys know, but maybe the listeners don't know, I grew up on Long Island, so I did not live anywhere, or not too near the storm. So when you first talked about the anniversary before the episode, full transparency, I had no idea about it. I had to look it up, and between doing my research and even the pictures you showed me from just the aftermath of the tornado, I couldn't even imagine having to live through that and recover through it.
Yeah, I mean, and I mentioned that this was a defining event for myself, but this was also a defining event for a lot of these communities. I mean, people did lose their lives, and so in that aspect, it did obviously impact people's lives directly. But on top of everything else, the way that the South End was hit, it has never been the same.
Yeah.
Obviously, one of the major reasons why MGM Springfield is where it is was because there was the opportunity to revitalize an area that was in need of some help before this happened, and then was in desperate need of help. You also, I mean, there have been signs of recovery over and over. There's been redevelopment of certain areas. One of the things was the Square One headquarters was in the South End, and they had to move, and they're just now breaking ground to get back to the original site where they were.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time of recovery, and we're still getting there in Springfield and in a lot of these other communities as well. I mean, there is some irony to the fact that some of these neighborhoods that have gotten some new growth and some revitalization, it might not have even happened if not for the tornado. So if you're looking for a silver lining, so to speak, I mean, Munson is one of those towns, when I talk about resiliency, they took this tornado head on. I mean, the center of Munson, really, I've never been in a war zone, but I would imagine that is much what it looks like.
Yeah.
You really look at it now, and you look at what it was after that tornado, and it's unrecognizable. Wilbraham had a lot of damage, and then Wilbraham followed that up with a separate microburst sometime later. So they had all kinds of issues. And just in general, when I look back, things that were surreal, like some of this damage, you've got cars that were literally lifted up and thrown into ponds.
Yeah.
One of the areas that I covered was around the old Cathedral High School. The pressure from the wind was so strong, it blew out the back wall of the gymnasium. And just things like seeing the National Guard everywhere.
Yeah.
Just such a surreal kind of thing. So when I think back on this, I just think about, for me, it's just such a wow moment, even now when I'm recapping it. I also think about how this all kind of went for us, trying to cover this.
Yeah.
Not only cover it, because there were so many areas that you couldn't access, and so there's a lot of moving around on foot, and trying to access people when you didn't have access to electricity in a lot of areas, and phone lines were down and things like that. But for us in the newsroom, we didn't have power for, like much of the area, we didn't have power for a long time.
Yeah.
The tornado really ripped through the electrical grid for a lot of this area, and we still had newspapers to put out.
Yeah.
So we were actually running a couple of generators so that we could run a handful of computers, and we're kind of swapping off on who was using computers so that we could write the stories, do the layout, and everything like that.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was really something that I think that those of us who are a part of that still look back on with some pride. But it's also one of those things that's like, man, I hope I never have to do something like that again.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I mean, I just remember even from when I was a kid, not that the fear has gone away, but when you see, a tornado watch or a tornado warning in any area, you kind of get scared. You don't want to see anything like that happen, but, you kind of always don't think it's going to happen, worst case you go in the basement or, something like that. But I feel like most of the time people just think, nothing's going to come of it until it does. So I can only imagine so many people this day seeing cars flipped and brick buildings just getting, lifted and destroyed. It's something that they'll think about for a while. I know I've seen a bunch of articles in past years of people coming together to just remember what happened years and years ago. And it's something that I know if I lived through it, I would be thinking about it every year on June 1st.
Yeah, it's funny because there's a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of, I felt like this year especially there didn't seem to be a lot of attention on it. Mayor Sarno and Springfield put out a press release on it, but there didn't seem to be the same kind of observance of it that I've seen in the past, which I thought was interesting. Maybe it's this kind of, quote unquote new normal that we're getting used to, things that were altered originally. It would still look jarring for a while, oh, there used to be this here and that's not there.
Yeah.
Or even like, you used to be able to see the path up over the mountain in Wilbraham where it crossed over into Hamden and then Munson.
Yeah.
And that, the vegetation has kind of started to grow back and stuff like that. So that's not as stark. So I don't think it's quite as in people's minds, and it's not as evident and present the way that it was for a while. But at the same time, you're absolutely right. Like now, I think people are more aware of the warnings and tornado watches and things like that. Whereas before, people were just like, oh yeah, tornado in Western Massachusetts.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever. But since then, I think that people are a lot more aware of that kind of thing. And we've been seeing more and more severe weather as time goes on. So I think people are getting more sensitive about that. So
I agree. Well, to move into our next story of the podcast, it's official. Sonia Dinnall will become the next leader of Springfield Public Schools. The school committee voted 4-3 in favor of Dinnall, who is one of 3 finalists for the position. When she takes over, following Superintendent Dan Warwick's retirement at the end of the year, she will be the first female and first black female superintendent in the history of the department. Dinnall will take over with extensive experience in Springfield and urban schools. She most recently worked as Chief of Family and Community Engagement for Springfield Public Schools Empowerment Zone after working previously as the High School of Commerce Principal and Hartford Public Schools Executive Director of College and Career Readiness. She beat out fellow finalists Springfield Public Schools Lead Chief Schools Officer Kimberly Wells and Renee Sanchez, Superintendent of the Champlain Valley School District in Vermont. Before the final vote in favor of Dinnall, school committee members motioned to select Wells as superintendent. However, this vote failed 4-3.
Warwick announced his retirement at the end of the school year in late January, and that began what turned out to be an arduous process. Members of the community and the school committee, including Vice Chair Josiah Gonzalez, objected to the process and sought to restart the search. A series of accusations were lobbed between Mayor Dominic Sarno and Gonzalez and several other members walked out of a meeting after Warwick and the mayor refused to put an item related to allowing the screening committee to evaluate all 11 applications as opposed to just the 5 who were determined to meet the criteria that was agreed upon for the job description. In response to the walkout, Sarno held a fiery press conference that I actually attended, and during which he dropped an expletive more than once and accused those who participated in the walkout of trying to push their own preferred candidates, and suggested that one of the candidates who didn't meet the criteria for qualification was related to Gonzalez. Members of the committee conducted another walkout in response to the mayor's comments, and Gonzalez likewise accused Sarno of breaching confidentiality of the process.
Wow.
A little side piece to this is there's since been a request for an investigation into an open meeting violation, basically suggesting that when at the second meeting, when they walked out, that should have ended the meeting and no other business should have happened.
Okay.
Now, they actually ended up convincing one of the members who had walked out to come back in so that they could approve, I think it was a field trip that needed school committee approval in order to go through.
Yeah.
And so someone came back in so that they could do that. And there have been questions raised about whether or not that was an open meeting violation, because some people are interpreting it as when they walked out, the meeting closed, whereas others believe that, no, it was still an open meeting. Just because members walked out and didn't participate doesn't mean that the meeting closed. So there's a little bit of this that's still ongoing, but the major issue here of finding a new leader for the schools is finally resolved.
Yeah. Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions, especially, before they picked a superintendent, just about the walkout. Because, obviously things come up, members miss meetings all the time, but their vote just wouldn't matter. But in this sense, they walked out. So would they abstain because they were close enough where you could have kind of had them in other votes? So that definitely is a little gray area, I would think.
Yeah, it's I think that these walkouts were more to be demonstrative of displeasure in the process and their unwillingness to participate in processes that they didn't believe were fair or on the up and up. I think that I'm just glad that we got down to the heart of the issue, which was identifying qualified candidates for the position. I don't really want to get into the weeds in the podcast. Now, Laura Mason did some great work covering this, and our coverage is on thereminder.com because it is a little bit convoluted in terms of what they were protesting, why they were concerned, but a lot of it revolved around this idea that the screening committee should have access to all of the candidates who applied, not just the ones who a third party legal firm reviewed the applicants to make sure that they met the qualifications that the school committee had agreed upon. And the screening committee asked if they could see all of them. And there were all kinds of questions about whether or not that was going to violate confidentiality and all these kinds of issues. And I think on top of everything else, one of the major things that this illustrates is how much more difficult this term is going to be for Mayor Sarno, who is, on top of everything else, the chair of the school committee, than it has been in the past. He, and this is also just a symptom of being mayor for a decade and a half, is the number of people who take issue with your choices over the years continues to grow. And also, as time goes on, people retire and move on and things like that. So in a lot of ways, while your opposition is growing, your allies are kind of falling away. So I think that this is also a very big indicator of how difficult this term is going to be for Mayor Sarno.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was kind of also just going to mention with just the school committee itself. Obviously, I see a little bit of the experience that Dinnall has. I don't know really too much, obviously, about all the other finalists, but it seems like the committee itself was already pretty split who they kind of wanted. They had a different motion for Wells, and even, the vote in favor of Dinnall was 4-3. I'm not saying all these committee members will, be against her in any sort of way. But, it's going to be very interesting to just see how school committee meetings and issues and matters going forward.
Sure, yeah. I've seen this go well. I've seen people be able to be completely professional and everything, and I've seen it go the other way, too, where these contentious issues bleed over into the relationship with the candidate who is selected. One thing that comes to mind specifically from my days covering news more regularly was there was a really contentious issue with choosing a town manager in Longmeadow. And it was a split decision, and they ended up choosing a guy, and man, some people just did not give this guy a shot from the start. It was very clear. They made it very clear that they did not choose him. And I'll also say in a lot of cases, he didn't do himself any favors, but you could see that the relationship was not a great start to a professional relationship. And so you hope that on all sides, especially because you're talking about the largest school district outside of Boston, that ultimately you'll be able to put that focus first, and the fact that your candidate didn't necessarily get the job second.
Yeah, exactly. But I know we both wish the best and congratulate Dinnall on her acceptance, and we'll be following this as things go on in the future.
I'm sure that we'll have something with her shortly once she's actually assumed the role. There are a couple weeks left of the school year for Springfield.
Mm-hmm.
My wife's a Springfield school teacher on top of everything else, and I know she's looking very much forward to the summer break.
Yeah.
But things are just getting started for this new superintendent. So I'm looking forward to us having a conversation with her. Maybe we'll even be able to get her on the podcast, and that would be great. And hopefully we will, one way or another, whether it's in print or on the podcast, maybe both, we'd be able to, to learn more about her vision for the school department.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. Could talk a little bit about the challenges, and that kind of segues us into our next topic we have on the podcast, and it's chaos that has been going on in Chicopee schools. During a Chicopee School Committee meeting on May 15th, multiple faculty members from the Chicopee Public Schools used the public comment portion of the meeting to express their concerns with the way students were acting. Multiple members highlighted events where students were verbally and even physically abusive towards teachers. One instance was Chicopee Comprehensive High School English teacher, Michelle Foley, read a statement from a teacher who was verbally assaulted and punched in the face on an incident on May 14th. She read the letter because he was still wanting to stay anonymous and was still kind of scarred by the matter because it was still just a day fresh at the time. She read the letter from him and said, "As both a teacher and alum of Chicopee Public Schools, it saddens me greatly to say that my perspective of our district has been severely tainted after an incident yesterday where I was assaulted by a student. For 12 years as a student and 6 years as a teacher, I truly never felt unsafe in our district, trusting that those in control were safeguarding both students and staff against external threats." The letter also stated that he was struck twice in the head by a student after he was trying to get the student to go to class instead of roaming the halls and skipping class. And he also mentioned being pushed down, losing his glasses, and even staggered, stunned, and saw stars for a few moments. Yeah, this was a tough meeting to watch. Multiple members shared similar instances with students just disobeying rules and not even verbally but physically assaulting them and stuff in the hallways. Kids who just don't want to go to class, and it's tough to see. Also, just after I wrote this article, I had multiple people reach out to me with similar concerns in different school districts, different states. I know this is obviously a story about Chicopee Public Schools, but this is unfortunately happening everywhere. It seems like I've talked to family members who know people who work in different school districts, and they say the same thing. It's unfortunate, but it seems like students and kids are just getting more and more disobedient in a sense.
Yeah, obviously this is very concerning. From a personal standpoint, it's concerning. I'm the spouse of an educator myself, so when I read this story, it really to say that it shook me is not hyperbole, and I don't presume to have the answers, but school should be one of those places that is a source of safety. It should be a place where people can feel comfortable and really kind of be able to learn without serious concern for their safety or their physical or mental well-being. So it's become seemingly a larger and larger problem, and it doesn't seem to be it doesn't seem to be an urban problem. It's not, it's a problem throughout, from the comments that you've received, from people that I've talked to about this, from comments and such that we've received from our social media and other ways that people reach out to us. It's just troubling overall. Staff member after staff member continued to express during this meeting similar concerns to previous speakers, and they explained that they were there to look for something to change within the schools, or else more teachers may leave and others may not want to get hired in Chicopee. At the meeting, the Chicopee Education Association president and Chicopee teacher Laura Demakis announced that she was stepping down as president, and explained her reasoning because she said she cannot be a part of an educational system that is normalizing a threatening, degrading, violent workplace for educators and students. There is so much more to putting out fires than education going on. I mean, I think that statement in and of itself is incredibly strong. That their teachers are, and administrators too, are being asked to be so much more than just teachers. You know, that there's that there's so much more behavior management going on. You know, and that's a striking statement. Moving on. Demacus continued to read multiple vulgar complaints she received from staff that students were saying to them. The school committee or Superintendent Marcus Ware did not comment at the meeting because, according to the meeting rules, questions asked by the public will be referred to the committee on an administrative level for consideration and later response. Like I've said, I'm not sure there's a lot more than I can add other than this is obviously disturbing, and there's certainly merit to Demacus's sentiment that this is not only going to drive teachers away, it's going to drive future teachers away from the profession. The issue here is Chicopee, but this is something that I think is a concern district-wide, or I mean, excuse me, not just in this district, but statewide and perhaps in other parts of the country as well. We are already facing teacher shortages. We're already looking at teachers saying, well, with all of these things that we have to consider in addition to teaching, is this a pay scale that's worth it on top of everything else? And that's when you're not being assaulted.
Yeah, that's true. I was going to say a similar thing. Teachers already have such a responsibility to educate, the future. And focus on lesson plans and making sure everyone's up to speed with with what they're learning and things like that. And to now have to worry about if you tell a kid to go back to class, you might get assaulted, is just mind-boggling to me. Because I remember talking about this and talking about being in middle school, high school, college. You always had your troublemaker kids. Maybe show up late to class, not pay attention, fall asleep. If a teacher told them to do something, they just maybe not do it. But I really, this could have just been my school in particular. I really never saw a student verbally attack a teacher and definitely not physically attack a teacher. So to see that this is something nowadays that is just almost common in a sense is it's alarming. And I know one of the pictures that I took at the meeting was powerful, of one of the teachers holding up a sign and says, our safety is not negotiable, because obviously so many things are going on. That's a whole nother story within budgets in schools and, certain programs and teachers getting cut. But it seems like this is just something that, like you said, I don't have the answer for either, but it's something that we definitely have to find a way to fix. And since the meeting, I've also reached out to the Chicopee Education Association and Chicopee Public Schools to talk more about the problems and solutions. I have yet to hear back, but the next school committee meeting is June 5th, which is tomorrow as of the recording, but when this posts, it will have passed. But the full article can be found at thereminder.com, and we'll be back after a few more messages.
Would you like to put your products and services before more than 2,500 potential customers in just one day? That's what a booth at the Prime Living Senior Expo can do for your business. If your goal is connecting with consumers age 50 plus, let the Prime Living Senior Expo help you reach this exploding market. To book your space for September 8th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. in MGM's Aria Ballroom, contact your sales representative or visit primelifeexpo.com.
Come check out the Artist of the Month, now on display at Kemp Vanderburg Realty Consultants in East Long Meadow. They feature local artists and display their artwork in the office each and every month. The general public is welcome to come in and observe their art. If any members of the public see any pieces they would like, they can make a purchase. This month, the community is invited to see the art of Sue James from June 6th through June 29th. Kemp Vanderburg Realty Consultants is located at 42 Harkness Ave in East Long Meadow. For more information, call 413-427-0297.
And we're back. Next on the agenda for this episode is the Northampton budget and its impact on the schools. Northampton Mayor Gina Louise Shara unveiled her proposed fiscal year 2025 budget last month, and that budget leaves the public schools far short of the increase sought by the school committee. The committee requested a 14% increase, which it said was necessary to avoid any cuts to the school department. Shara initially recommended a 4% increase, but bumped that up to 8.5% over the department's base budget. And in total, that increase would be just over 5% more than the last year's total appropriation, which included an additional $1.2 million to help close the district's $2.3 million budget gap in the last fiscal year. The recommendation would require a $3 million Proposition 2.5 general budget override, which voters would decide on in November at the election. If passed, the override would increase the fiscal year taxes for fiscal year 2026, and if it fails, the city would need to make additional cuts.
The mayor's full budget comes after months of contentious debate between community activists and city officials that started in December when Superintendent Portia Bonner presented a first-look budget with an 8% increase and recommendations to cut 20 full-time positions in the district. Since then, students, staff, community activists, and member of the Northampton Association of School Employees had utilized public comments, protests, and a recent community forum to argue that anything less than fully funding public schools is unacceptable. On May 1st, 20 layoffs and 20 involunteer transfers were doled out across the district by the superintendent's office in anticipation of the upcoming budget vote. Shara said during the May 16th City Council meeting that her new proposed increase would most likely change the number of pink slips handed out, but she was unsure if Bonner would have that updated information in time for budget hearings.
Obviously, everybody wants the schools to be funded and for programs to be adequately, supported. But I can see why financially and fiscally the mayor would have a problem defending a 14% increase.
Yeah.
I'm certainly one who's in favor of funding education, but I wonder, as an outsider looking in on this, my first question would be, where are the efficiencies? Are there ways that we can maintain programming while reducing the bottom line? And it's possible that has taken place. And certainly I'm not advocating anyone losing their jobs, but the reality is 14% is pretty steep. And I mean, honestly, in some communities that we cover, if they looked at an 8% increase for one department, even though that is the school department, which makes up such a large part of the budget, and makes and serves such a large part of the community, a lot of our communities would just balk at that and say no way outright.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a similar thought. I wish we had a camera for this podcast because as soon as you read the 14% increase, my eyes bulged out of my head a little bit because I thought that number was a bit high from covering different communities in the past or reading all the other different budget stories our staff writers have written. That number seemed a bit high to me for sure, and to see such a difference between obviously what the school committee had and the mayor had in their preliminary budgets were interesting. And like you said, to even see that they kind of recommended or even talked about the 14% increase was interesting. I know they Shara bumped it up to 8.5%, and it's going to be interesting come November to see kind of, I guess, how that goes if there is the Proposition 2.5 override vote and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things is we've heard a lot, less so now, but especially coming out of the pandemic, people were talking a lot about like the fiscal cliff. And I'd say that this is an example of it. You reach a point where you're just where you're going to have to make some difficult choices. We're seeing it statewide with the governor said a few months ago, hey, we're not hitting our revenues. We're going to have to slash the budget. This is a real thing that's happening everywhere, but this is a very real and very stark local example of hitting that fiscal cliff. Yeah. It's something that we're seeing in a lot of districts. I think that a lot of districts in different ways are grappling with similar budget concerns. A lot of other districts used ESSER funding to fund recurring costs when they were told, don't use this on recurring costs. Yeah. Like salaries and things like that, and now they're in trouble. Yeah, I don't think that that's necessarily the issue here. I know that Shara has been concerned about about spending and about this kind of fiscal situation for a couple of budget cycles now. But this is probably the most extreme case that I've seen. And unfortunate that this is, what we're looking at. Anybody losing their job is tough. 20 people losing their jobs and 20 people going somewhere else because things need to be reworked to make the budget fit.
Yeah.
Is especially tough. But it seems like perhaps some harder questions need to be asked to keep this from getting worse. They already had a budget shortfall last year. They're looking at another one this year. Eventually, something's got to give to catch up, or else you're going to be facing this same kind of thing year after year.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like you said, they had a budget shortfall last year, which was already mentioned. And, just listening and covering different schools, I'm not trying to go against Northampton by any means, but, you see superintendents come out and, they have to make these hard decisions in different programs. Year after year, superintendents and mayors come out and they say, we had to cut 10 positions this year after cutting 14 positions last year and, 5 the year before that. So, you do hate to hear about this, and especially like you said, the school budget, which is a lot of most towns' entire budget for that year. But, you hope that somebody, maybe this year or in years to come, that they can find ways to save money here, save money there without losing positions and hopefully without losing programs, because we already mentioned in the previous story about Chicopee schools that it's already becoming crazier to work as a teacher. So, you want to be able to try and keep teachers who enjoy the job in the profession.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough either way. I don't want to make it sound like, too bad, so sad for these people.
Yeah.
But this is the reality. There's got to be a balance somewhere. You've got to, and I think that this ultimately goes to larger issues with how state reimbursements work and state funding, works, and they've adjusted, the funding formulas for certain programs, and so now it's not as advantageous for some, and in some cases we've seen that it's actually less equitable than it was before. So I think that there are larger issues at work here. This is, but for this community in particular, there reaches a point when you're in a situation and you're not going to be able to spend your way out of it. So that's, I guess in the short term, Northampton has to grapple with what they're dealing with now, so that long term they can create a stable base where they can support teachers with resources and salary and things like that work. Right now it seems like there's imbalance, and that's something that needs to be rectified before that kind of stability and growth can happen.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because I agree 14% is a little bit high, but there has to be a balance to be able to work through the budget process and, be able to find a number that's closer with the town and stuff like that. So I'm interested to see, how the budget hearings go and, the future of this budget along with any other school budget going forward. But to move away a little bit from the sagas in different school districts, we have a story for our last topic, the Westfield vintage baseball team. The Westfield team is among 8 vintage baseball teams from throughout the Northeast that will gather for some old-fashioned baseball at the first ever Old Time Baseball Festival in Suffield, Connecticut this month. The Westfield Wheelman founder Dan Genovese said the team organized a 2-day baseball festival on June 8th and June 9th at Hilltop Farm so people can step back in time and experience America's favorite pastime as it was played in a simpler time. The old-time sport is more widely known as vintage baseball. It is played all over the country with teams of amateur ball players. Its ballists play baseball, 2 words, by the rules and customs of the 19th century, according to Genovese. This style of play was from a time before baseball gloves or protective equipment and everyone is wearing baggy wool uniforms. The rule sets can range from American Civil War style through a more modern play style in the 1880s and 1890s. Genovese said this time period saw constant changes in rules to make the game more appealing to the fan, known back then as cranks. Some rule changes were to create more offense, while some changes were to cool the offense, and some changes were made to fix the game. As players got to know the rules of the young sport, they found ways to take advantage of loopholes.
The lineup of regional teams includes the Mudville Baseball Club, the Lisbon Tunnelmen, the Hartford Bulldogs, the Saugerties Baseball Club, the Dirigo Baseball Club, the Providence Grays, and the Mountain Athletic Club. Genevieve said the Westfield Wheelmen were reformed in 2006 and take their name from an actual Westfield baseball team from 1886. He came across this genre of baseball in 2004 while researching his first Westfield baseball book. 5 games will be played on 2 fields at Hilltop on June 8th. They are scheduled for 10 a.m. as well as noon, 2, 4, and 9 p.m. The June 9th games will be played at 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. There's an admission charge of $5 per carload, and fans should bring their own lawn chairs and coolers. Hot dogs and hamburgers will be available for purchase. The farm is at 1616 Mapleton Ave. That's on Route 159, just over the state line from Main Street in Agawam. Now, this just seems like a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I wanted to talk about it, because this just gave me those Field of Dreams vibes, the old-time baseball, and people who are passionate about the sport and just, want to be able to play the game they love.
Yeah, and it's, obviously Westfield being a part of this is, Westfield has a very long and strong baseball history, so this plays right into that. I know that what they have now in Westfield with the strong youth organizations that they have, and now the Starfires are there as well, that all comes from a very deep lineage, and it's cool that that this kind of plays into that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And just from reading about the article, just kind of them talking about the American Civil War style and modern style played in the 80s and the 90s of the 1800s. I'm a big baseball fan myself, but obviously I was not around during that time. So I had to, look up those different play styles and, different ways to play the game. And it definitely seems like a lot of fun and a different play style of the game of baseball today.
Yeah, you mentioned Field of Dreams, and it's just like, this is like well before even, the Field of Dreams
exactly.
kind of idea. It's very cool, and, it kind of, it's fun to kind of have something that harkens back to those really early times of baseball when it was much more, I would say, more of a game than a sport,
Mm-hmm.
and nowadays baseball is such a huge, global thing on top
Mm-hmm.
of everything else.
Exactly.
But to see it in kind of its original form, which was much more casual and much more of if you think about Civil War soldiers playing, in between, all of the wartime things that were going on, to kind of have some kind of recreation and to break away from what was obviously a terrible thing going on
Mm-hmm.
at the time. It's just, it's interesting how baseball has such a history in the history of our country, dating that far back. So.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, I hope they have good weather this weekend and, only for $5 a carload with hot dogs and hamburgers and hopefully a sunny day. I hope people show up because this sounds like something that I would want to go to for a fan of baseball, just to go watch some guys who love the sport and play.
That sounds like fun. Well, and that wraps up this edition of So That Reminds Me.
Thank you for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks to bring you another episode.
Thanks for listening to So That Reminds Me, produced by Western Massachusetts news source Reminder Publishing. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, find the latest news at thereminder.com, and follow Reminder Publishing on Instagram at Reminder Publishing, on X at The Reminder MA, and on Facebook. Reminder Publishing, we are hometown news.